The teeth were close enough to smell. Not the artificial scent of the cell's ventilation system. Something older, wet stone and iron, and the particular musk of a creature that had not evolved to be domesticated. The Siege-class Ravager filled the modified containment unit with 4 meters of scarred darkness, its color-shifting scales flickering between rage black and something lighter Daniel couldn't name. The handlers had raised the temperature, added substrate, dimmed the lights to a natural cycle. They had tried to make it comfortable. SC-779 charged anyway. The floor shook, 17 soldiers dead, a mining colony reduced to rubble, 6 handlers in the medical wing with injuries they would carry for life. Daniel knew these numbers the way he knew the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He had read the dossier until the words stopped being statistics and became something he could almost taste. He did not run. Sitting was harder than standing. Sitting meant making yourself smaller in front of something that interpreted smallness as opportunity. Daniel folded his legs beneath him, pressed his palms flat against the floor, and made his breathing slow and visible. The charge stopped 3 meters away, close enough that the displaced air ruffled his hair. "I know you're angry," he said. The words came out steady, which surprised him. "You have every right to be. They killed your eggs, they hurt you, they locked you in a box and expected you to be grateful." The roar softened to a growl. Confusion mixed with rage in the creature's posture, a tension Daniel had seen before in wounded predators back on Earth. The scales shifted again, not lighter, waiting. By hour 8, SC-779 lay down, still watching, no longer aggressive. Day 3 morning, it walked to him, lowered its massive head, sniffed the medical scanner Daniel held in trembling fingers. The breath was hot. The teeth were close enough to remove his head in one snap. The snap didn't come. A low, questioning sound, a request. "Yeah," Daniel answered. "I can help. Let me see that right side." The creature that had destroyed a mining colony exposed its injured flank, laid down, offered its wounded side to the human who had asked permission first. "The part that still keeps me up at night, that comes later. And it starts with teeth." 3 weeks earlier, Helix Academy Station, Observation Deck 12. Instructor Wren stood with his lower arms crossed and his upper arms resting on the observation rail, a posture his students had learned to read as either thinking hard or getting ready to fail someone. The training habitat dome stretched 3 kilometers in every direction beneath the deck, filled with artificial jungle that looked and smelled exactly like the death worlds most species tried to avoid. Humidity fogged the lower viewport. Somewhere in the canopy, something that was not quite a bird screamed at something that was not quite a monkey. 20 cadets sat in the briefing room below, representing 12 species from across the galaxy. Most of them had claws, fangs, armored skin, or enhanced senses that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. The Turok in the front row flexed armor-plated arms that could crush stone. The Salvani near the door kept her blade arms gleaming, a nervous habit that meant she was calculating kill angles. The Dree in the corner twitched his hearing fins, tracking conversations up to 50 meters away. Then there was Daniel Brooks. Wren watched the human check the straps on his boots for the 3rd time. Daniel had removed 2 chest armor plates already and stacked them on the bench beside him, a choice that made the Turok cadet's jaw tighten with what Wren's cultural briefing identified as contempt. The human looked like he would lose a fight with a strong breeze. Pale skin, dark hair cropped short for practicality, hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who had done dangerous things before and survived by being smart instead of strong. "Today's examination," Wren announced through the deck speakers, "requires cadets to neutralize a bioengineered ravager without killing it. You have 6 hours. Failure means semester repetition. Standard loadout, stunner rifle, tracking sensors, armor plating, emergency beacon." The Turok Grath raised one massive arm. "Instructor, the human, is he permitted to participate without full armor?" Wren's mandibles clicked in a pattern he hoped sounded like thoughtful consideration rather than the amusement he actually felt. "Cadet Brooks has not violated regulations. His equipment choices are his own." Daniel looked up from his boots. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew something the room didn't, or someone who had simply stopped caring about the room's opinion. Wren couldn't tell which. He filed the observation for later analysis. The briefing continued. The Ravager was territorial, aggressive, designed for military assessment purposes. It had already faced 7 examination groups in the past month. Each group had failed. The creature was learning. Wren noticed something wrong as Daniel opened his waterproof notebook. The human wasn't writing words. He was drawing small diagrams, numbering sections of the habitat dome in a sequence that didn't match the standard grid coordinates. The numbers ran 7, 3, 12, 1, 9. Ren checked his own display. Standard tracking readouts showed sectors A through M in alphabetical order. Daniel's numbers didn't correspond to anything in the Academy database. What was he actually mapping? Strength proves worth, Grath announced to the room, flexing his plated arms. The statement hung in the air like bad cologne, aggressive and impossible to ignore. I will demonstrate why the Turok method dominates these exercises. The Salvani Quickclaw hissed agreement. Her blade arms caught the artificial sunlight. Speed dominates strength, the beast will not even see me coming. Other cadets postured. The Dree laughed at something Sharpsense whispered, a sound like gravel sliding down a pipe. Daniel said nothing. He finished his strange numbering, closed the notebook and stood. He walked to the equipment rack and selected a stunner rifle but left the tracking sensors on their hook. He checked the charge on the emergency beacon, then pocketed it without attaching it to his gear. Ren watched him negotiate with a handler near the coffee station. The human's voice was too quiet for the deck's audio pickups, but the body language was clear. Daniel gestured toward the coffee dispenser, then made a circular motion with one hand. The handler's posture shifted from refusal to reluctant consideration. 2 weeks of volunteer work in the recycling center, Ren guessed. The Academy coffee stock was Earth import, expensive, heavily rationed. Daniel wanted it for something. The handler nodded. Daniel took his cup and returned to the bench. Cadet Brooks, Ren said through the speaker, making his voice carry the weight of official inquiry. Your tracking sensors remain on the rack, explain. Daniel looked up. He sipped his coffee. It was a small defiance, drinking while an instructor waited, and Ren felt his mandibles click in a pattern he didn't fully recognize in himself. Noise, instructor. The sensors emit a low-frequency ping every 40 seconds for triangulation. The Ravager hears it from a kilometer away. It knows the sound means someone is hunting it. Daniel set the cup down. I'd rather it didn't know I was coming. Ren processed this. The statement contradicted every tactical doctrine the Academy taught. Tracking sensors were mandatory for cadet safety. Removing them meant operating blind in a 3-kilometer jungle filled with a creature designed to kill. In the armor plates, Ren asked. Noise, Daniel repeated. The fasteners click. The plates shift when you move. In a quiet environment, that's a signal. The Ravager isn't deaf, instructor, it's listening. Ren said nothing. In the observation room behind him, 2 assistant instructors exchanged glances. One of them, a Felson named Dr. Rowe, had skin that shifted toward purple confusion. Ren filed this too. The exam began. Grath went first. He charged into the habitat dome with his stunner rifle raised and his armor plates locked, a walking fortress of Turok confidence. The Ravager, 2 meters of color-shifting muscle and engineered instinct, did not meet him on open ground. It waited in the canopy shadow until Grath passed beneath, then dropped with a sound like tearing fabric. 3 hours later, Grath stumbled out. Claw marks scored his armor in parallel lines deep enough to expose the padding beneath. His stunner rifle was gone, lost somewhere in the undergrowth. He walked past Daniel without making eye contact, and Ren noted that the Turok's usual swagger had been replaced by something smaller, something that looked almost like shame. Quickclaw went second. She moved like her name suggested, a blur of precision and predatory grace. The Ravager matched her, not faster but more patient. It let her spend her speed in the first hour, then cornered her against the eastern waterfall. She returned in 2 hours, bleeding from shallow cuts along her blade arms, empty-handed, with a stillness in her posture that hadn't been there before. 5 more cadets followed. Each approach confirmed what the Academy taught: strength, speed, enhanced senses, overwhelming force. Each failed. The Ravager learned from every encounter. It became more aggressive, more defensive, more precise in its counterattacks. By the 7th failure, the observation room had grown quiet in a way Ren associated with funerals. He watched Daniel prepare. The human removed his remaining armor plates. All of them. He stood in the briefing room in a thin thermal suit that offered no protection against claws or teeth. He rubbed handfuls of Academy dirt and crushed plant matter from the habitat dome's entrance onto his exposed skin, his neck, his wrists, the backs of his hands. The handler who had traded him coffee watched with an expression Ren couldn't read. Way hunters back on Earth did it, Daniel said, though no one had asked. Mask your scent, become part of the environment. The Ravager isn't hunting random intruders, it's defending territory. It responds to threats, not to things that belong. Ren's mandibles clicked in the thoughtful hum pattern. He caught himself doing it and stopped. The statement broke something in the room's atmosphere. Sharpsense laughed, a sound like dry leaves crunching. The monster has feelings, Sharpsense asked. Is that the human theory? Daniel didn't answer. He checked his stunner rifle, set it to minimum charge, and entered the habitat dome without looking back. Ren tracked him on the observation displays. The human moved differently than the others. No straight lines, no confidence in open ground. He slipped through thick vegetation where the artificial canopy blocked satellite tracking. He paused every few minutes, listening, not for the ravager, for something else. The spaces where the artificial animals went quiet. Ren saw it on the thermal overlay before Daniel could have. A cool spot in the undergrowth near the northern ridge. The artificial birds had stopped calling in a 200-meter radius. The not-quite monkeys had gone silent. Daniel moved toward this absence like a man following a map he had drawn in his head. He found claw marks on a fallen trunk, fresh, deep enough to expose the white heartwood beneath the bark. Daniel knelt. He touched the marks with one finger, then smelled it. Ren watched him pull a medical scanner from his pocket and run it over the exposed wood. Infected tissue. The ravager had wounded itself in its fight with Quickclaw, and the claw marks showed the telltale swelling of a bacterial infection common in bioengineered specimens. Daniel made a note in his waterproof notebook. Then he reached into his pack and scattered small food offerings around the trunk. Not in a trail, not leading anywhere, just scattered as if they had fallen from a passing animal. Daniel sat down 40 meters from the den he had identified. He placed his hands palm up on his knees, visible to anything watching. He slowed his breathing until his chest barely moved. He waited. 2 hours passed on the observation deck. Ren's lower arms ached from holding the same position. The other instructors drifted away to check other duties, then drifted back, drawn by something they couldn't name. At the 2-hour and 17-minute mark, the ravager emerged. It moved like liquid caution, testing each step, its scales shifting through colors Ren had no names for. It found the food, ate it, sat 10 meters from Daniel with its tail wrapped around its feet, watching him with eyes that reflected the artificial sunlight in flat, unreadable planes. Daniel talked. Ren couldn't hear the words through the habitat's audio systems. The human had disabled his microphone along with his sensors, but he could see the mouth moving. Slow rhythm, measured pauses, the kind of voice you used with something that could kill you, not because it wanted to, but because it didn't know you weren't a threat yet. The ravager lowered its head to Daniel's palm. Not aggressive, not playful, just simple contact, acknowledgement. Daniel pulled the medical scanner from his pocket. He ran it over his own arm first, demonstrating, then he extended it toward the ravager's infected claw. The creature growled, a sound that made the observation deck's glass vibrate, but it didn't pull away. Daniel counted aloud, his lips moving in a rhythm Ren could almost read. 1, 2, 3. He applied antiseptic. He wrapped a regenerative bandage around the wounded digit with the careful precision of someone who had done this before, who had held predators while they healed. The ravager followed him 2 kilometers to the extraction point. It walked beside him, not behind, not leading, just present, like something between wild and willing. The observation room erupted. Pelly's skin flashed orange shock, a color shift so rapid it looked like a warning light. Grath's jaw hung open, the armor-plated arms that had failed now hanging useless at his sides. Quickclaw's blade arms extended unconsciously, a threat display triggered by confusion rather than intent. Daniel reached the extraction door. He removed his exam badge, standard-issue polymer with scuffed edges from field use, and handed it to the handler who had traded him coffee. "Tell Instructor Ren I passed," he said. Ren's mandibles clicked in a pattern he didn't recognize. It wasn't the thoughtful hum. It wasn't amusement. It was something closer to fear, or maybe the first stage of understanding that fear had been the wrong response all along. The handler took the badge. The ravager sat at the habitat dome's threshold, watching Daniel leave with the bandaged paw held slightly off the ground, and Ren realized he was witnessing something the Academy's curriculum had no category for. He found Daniel in the common area an hour later. The human was drinking the coffee he had earned, sitting at a table designed for 40 different species with 40 different anatomies. The chair didn't fit him, he didn't seem to care. "Instructor," Daniel said without looking up. "Cadet Brooks," Ren settled into a chair that accommodated his 4 arms with poor grace. "Your methods violate 17 standard safety protocols." "Yes." "Your equipment choices endangered your life and potentially the specimen." "Yes." "And yet," Ren paused, his mandibles clicked, he couldn't stop them. The specimen followed you, it allowed medical treatment, it displayed what my behavioral assessment team is calling non-aggressive proximity behavior. We have no precedent for this. Daniel sipped his coffee. Back on Earth, we spent thousands of years learning that predators aren't monsters. They're animals with motivations, fear, pain, territory. The Ravager wasn't hunting those cadets, it was driving them away. Every encounter confirmed that they were threats, so it got better at being threatening. Ren processed this? The numbers in the waterproof notebook made sense now, not grid coordinates, stress indicators. Daniel had been mapping the Ravager's defensive perimeter, identifying where the creature felt safest, where it felt most threatened. He had treated a battlefield like a habitat. Your file says you were a wildlife surveyor, Ren said, before the academy. 12 years, grizzly bears, wolves, things that could remove my head faster than that Ravager. Daniel set the cup down. The steam rose between them. Every predator, every dangerous thing I ever tracked was just trying to survive in the way it knew how. The dangerous ones weren't the aggressive ones, they were the ones that had learned aggression was the only response that worked. Ren's upper right hand tapped the table, a nervous habit he thought he had trained out of decades ago. The Academy does not teach this. The Academy teaches combat resolution, neutralization through superior force. I know, Daniel met his eyes. That's why 7 superior species just failed against a creature that weighs less than any one of them. Force isn't resolution, it's escalation. The Ravager learned to fight better because we kept teaching it that fighting was the exam. A shadow fell across the table. Ren smelled the ozone and ceramic scent of Dreth military regalia before he saw the figure. Fleet Commander Torvvic filled the common area doorway with 3 meters of dense muscle and natural armor plating, his ceremonial decorations outweighing anything tactical utility would justify. He moved with the deliberate care of something that had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill everything else, and he gripped the doorframe with a gentleness that contradicted his crushing strength. Instructor Ren, Torvvic said, his voice was gravel and authority. I have reviewed the examination footage, I require explanation. Ren stood, Daniel stood slower, keeping his hands visible, his posture open in a way that read as either respect or calculated non-threat. Ren couldn't tell which. Fleet Commander Ren said, Cadet Brooks employed non-standard methods during the Ravager examination. The results were unexpected. Torvvic's eyes, small and dark in his massive face, fixed on Daniel. Unexpected. The human neutralized a specimen that defeated 7 combat-ready cadets, without armor, without weapons discharge, without injury to himself or the specimen. He laughed, a rumbling burst that surprised everyone in the common area, including Torvvic himself. Unexpected is a word for weather patterns instructor, not for warfare. Daniel said nothing. Ren watched the human's hands, they were steady. The coffee cup sat on the table, cooling, forgotten. Explain your method, Torvvic commanded. I observed the Ravager, Daniel said. I identified its behavior as territorial defense rather than predation. I removed threat indicators. I offered medical aid for an injury caused by previous examination encounters. I waited until it chose to approach rather than forcing contact. And if it had not chosen to approach, Daniel's voice didn't change. Then I would have left, come back the next day, the day after, however long it took for the creature to understand I wasn't a threat. Torvvic's massive head tilted. The ceremonial decorations caught the common area's light and scattered it in patterns that looked almost like weapon fire. Patience is not a tactic. Yes, it is, Daniel said. It's just not one that looks impressive in a briefing video. Ren's mandibles clicked in rapid succession. He caught himself and forced them still. The statement hung in the air between species that measured worth through combat prowess and one human who had apparently never received that memo. Torvvic was silent for a long moment. The common area had gone quiet around them, 40 World Food Court conversations stalling as other cadets and instructors recognized the fleet commander's presence. Ren could smell the sulfur tang of recycled coolant from the station's lower vents, a background scent he usually ignored. Now it seemed sharp, almost painful. Perhaps you are not as soft as you appear, Torvvic said finally. The words came out grudging, pulled from somewhere deep in his chest. I will commission a formal study of your methods. The Dreth military hierarchy does not ignore effective tactics, even when they originate from unexpected sources. Ren felt something loosen in his thorax, not relief, something more complicated. The institutional machine was acknowledging Daniel, but Ren recognized the tone. Torvvic wasn't convinced, he was curious. Curiosity in a Dreth of his rank was dangerous because it usually led to testing. However, Torvvic continued, and Ren felt his mandibles click in the thoughtful hum pattern before he could stop them. The study requires validation against a more challenging specimen. The Siege-class Ravager designated SC-779, 4 meters, enhanced senses, intelligent ambush behavior. It has killed 17 soldiers, destroyed a mining colony, and injured 6 handlers in the past 8 months. The common area's air seemed to thin. Ren watched Daniel's face. The human's expression didn't change, but his right hand moved almost unconsciously to touch the empty space on his chest where his exam badge had been. Every behavioral assessment has failed, Torvvic said. Every military solution has been deemed unacceptable due to the specimen's value for research. The creature is deemed irredeemable, uncontainable, a monster. He looked at Daniel with eyes that had ordered death and called it strategy. "Do you want it alive or in pieces?" Daniel asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the silence Torvvic had created, "Because I can do either one. But one of those options is cruel and unnecessary. Your choice, sir." Torvvic stared at him. The rumbling laughter didn't come this time. Something else moved in his massive face, something Ren couldn't name because he had never seen it in a Dreth commander before. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first crack in an armor that wasn't physical. "The study begins in 72 hours, Torvvic said. He turned, his ceremonial decorations scraping the doorframe with a sound like distant gunfire. "Do not make me regret this, human." He left, the common area breathed again. Daniel picked up his coffee cup, it had gone cold. Ren sat back down, his 4 arms arranged themselves on the table in a posture he recognized as defeat, though he couldn't say who had defeated him. The Academy's doctrine, maybe. Or the human sitting across from him with a waterproof notebook full of numbers that didn't match anything in the official database. 17 soldiers, Ren said. It wasn't a question. 17 soldiers, Daniel confirmed, and a mining colony and 6 handlers. "You understand what you're agreeing to." Daniel finished the cold coffee. He set the cup down with a small click against the table's surface. "Impossible just means nobody's figured it out yet," he said. SC-779 isn't a monster instructor, it's a creature that learned violence was the only language anyone spoke to it. I'm going to try speaking something else. Ren watched him leave. The human walked toward the reinforced containment wing with the same pace he had used in the habitat dome, unhurried, observant, his hands empty and his armor left behind on a bench in the briefing room. The exam badge was in a handler's pocket, carrying a message that no longer seemed to mean what Ren had thought it meant. He sat alone in the common area for a long time, surrounded by the smells of 40 different cuisines and the sulfur tang of recycled coolant, listening to his own mandibles click in patterns he was only beginning to understand. Ren found Daniel in the reinforced containment wing, standing before a viewport that showed nothing but darkness. The observation systems for SC-779's cell had been disabled by order of the veterinary staff, a protocol for specimens that displayed what Dr. Rowe called heightened stress responses to visual monitoring. The Felson's skin had shifted to green fascination during the briefing, but his hands shook when he described the creature's file. 17 soldiers, Dr. Rowe had said, his color flickering toward purple confusion. The behavioral assessments blamed the creature for responding predictably to trauma and loss. The miners set up equipment directly on top of a nesting site. The Ravager was protecting eggs. The soldiers destroyed those eggs. Ren had watched Daniel's face during this revelation. The human didn't flinch. He simply made a note in his waterproof notebook, a small diagram that looked like a spiral with numbers around the edges. Now, in the containment wing, Daniel stood with his palms pressed against the cold viewport glass. He wore the same thin thermal suit he had used in the habitat dome. No armor, no weapons. The emergency beacon sat on a shelf behind him, its charge light blinking slow and steady. "You understand," Ren said, "that Torvvic expects failure. The study is a test of your method, but it is also a test of you. If you die, the Academy will record that human tactics are insufficient for siege-class specimens. If you succeed, you challenge the entire pedagogical model." Daniel didn't turn. "I know. The creature killed 17 soldiers, trained combatants with military-grade equipment. I know." Ren's mandibles clicked. He forced them still. Something in the human's calm broke patterns Ren had spent decades learning. The cadets who faced siege-class specimens either boasted or trembled. Daniel did neither. He simply stood in the dark, breathing, waiting for a door to open. "May I ask," Ren said, "what you are doing?" Daniel turned. His face was pale in the corridor's artificial light, but his eyes were focused on something beyond the viewport, beyond the station, somewhere in the space between what the Academy taught and what he had learned in 12 years of tracking things that could kill him. "Listening," he said. "For what?" "The ventilation. SC-779's cell has a separate air system. I can hear the fans cycle. Every 4 minutes, there's a change in pitch. That means temperature regulation. The handlers are trying to keep it comfortable." Daniel pressed his ear against the viewport glass. "But comfortable isn't the same as safe. The creature doesn't need comfort, it needs to stop being afraid." Ren processed this. The statement was simple and devastating. Every protocol the Academy used for dangerous specimens aimed at control through environmental management. Temperature, light, substrate, food schedules, they managed the creature's body and called it care. "The dossier," Ren said, "the behavioral assessments, they all concluded that SC-779 was inherently aggressive, irredeemable, a monster." Daniel stepped back from the viewport. He stretched his legs, rolled his shoulders, checked the fit of his thermal suit at the collar. The movements were small, ordinary, the kind of preparation a person made before a long hike rather than before facing a creature that had destroyed a colony. "The assessments were wrong," Daniel said. "They blamed the creature for responding predictably to trauma. Every test, every encounter, every soldier with a weapon confirmed that the world was hostile, so it became more hostile in return." He looked at Ren. "It's not a monster, instructor. It's a parent that lost its children and learned that teeth were the only answer anyone understood." Ren's upper right hand moved to his chest, touching the commendation medal he wore for a tactical analysis he had performed 30 years ago. The medal suddenly felt heavy, in a way it never had before. The door to SC-779's cell opened. Daniel walked through without hesitation. The cell was larger than the habitat dome, modified according to Torvvic's orders. Temperature raised to match the creature's home world. Substrate added to the floor, a mix of sand and crushed vegetation that smelled of sulfur and something sweeter Ren couldn't identify. The lights dimmed to a natural cycle, mimicking the day-night rhythm of the mining colony's planet. SC-779 charged immediately. The floor shook. The sound was not a roar. It was deeper, a bass note that Ren felt in his thorax before he heard it through the observation glass. 4 meters of scarred darkness moved with a speed that contradicted its mass. Color-shifting scales flickering through rage black and something that might have been fear if Ren had known how to read it. Daniel sat down. He folded his legs beneath him, pressed his palms flat against the substrate and made his breathing slow and visible. The same posture he had used in the habitat dome. The same posture he had used before the teeth came close enough to smell. "I know you're angry," Daniel said. The words carried through the cell's audio pickup, steady and quiet. "You have every right to be. They killed your eggs, they hurt you, they locked you in a box and expected you to be grateful." The charge stopped 3 meters away. Close enough that the displaced air ruffled Daniel's hair. Close enough that Ren could see the individual scars on the creature's scales, white lines where military weapons had marked it. Close enough that the teeth, each one longer than Daniel's hand, gleamed in the dim light. The roar softened to a growl. Confusion mixed with rage in the creature's posture. Ren had seen this before in the habitat dome, but SC-779 was larger, older, more wounded in ways that didn't show on the surface. The scales shifted, not lighter, waiting, assessing whether this small, unarmored thing was a new kind of threat or something else entirely. Daniel didn't move. He talked about Earth, about grizzly bears he had tracked with a broken ankle, about wolves that had circled his camp for 3 nights without attacking because he had stopped being prey and started being scenery. He talked about the sound of rivers and the smell of pine forests and the particular silence that fell when a predator decided you weren't worth the energy. The growl softened further, a low hum almost questioning. By hour 8, SC-779 lay down, still watching, no longer aggressive. Ren stood at the observation glass for the entire duration. His lower arms ached. His upper arms went numb. He didn't move. Other instructors came and went, drawn by rumor, leaving with expressions Ren couldn't read. Dr. Rowe's skin shifted through purple confusion to green fascination to orange shock and back again, a cycle of colors that told its own story. Torvvic arrived at hour 6. The Fleet Commander stood behind the observation glass with his massive arms crossed, his ceremonial decorations scraping the wall with a sound like distant thunder. He said nothing. His expression was unreadable, a mask of dread discipline that Ren had never seen crack. Day 2 began with Daniel demonstrating the medical scanner on himself. He ran it over his arm, his chest, his neck, showing the creature the device meant no harm. SC-779 watched from the corner of the cell, its massive head resting on its forelimbs, eyes tracking every movement. When Daniel approached within 5 meters, the creature didn't rise. It simply watched, breathing in a rhythm that matched the ventilation fans. Daniel talked about Earth wildlife. He described the migration patterns of animals Ren had never heard of, the way predators and prey established boundaries without violence, the 1,000 small signals that meant I'm not a threat in languages older than speech. He described tracking a grizzly bear through mountain terrain, or rather it had been a black bear, but the principle held. The bear had been injured, defensive, dangerous to everything that moved. Daniel had sat in a meadow for 2 days until the bear stopped seeing him as an intruder. "You're not a monster," Daniel said to SC-779. The words were soft, almost private, though the audio pickup carried them to every observer. "You're just in pain," and nobody bothered to ask why. Day 3 morning, SC-779 walked to Daniel. The movement was slow, deliberate, each step placed with a precision that spoke of a creature calculating risk against hope. It lowered its massive head, sniffed the medical scanner Daniel held in trembling fingers. The breath was hot. The teeth were close enough to remove Daniel's head in one snap. The snap didn't come. A low questioning sound, a request. "Yeah," Daniel answered. His voice was steady, though Ren could see the pulse hammering in his neck. "I can help. Let me see that right side." The creature that had destroyed a mining colony exposed its injured flank, laid down, offered its wounded side to the human who had asked permission first. Ren's mandibles clicked in a pattern he didn't recognize. It wasn't the thoughtful hum. It wasn't amusement. It was something closer to grief, or maybe the first stage of understanding that grief had been the appropriate response all along. Torvvic's hand gripped the observation rail. The metal bent under his strength, but his touch remained gentle, a contradiction Ren had noted before and now understood differently. The Fleet Commander's face was unreadable, but his breathing had changed. The massive chest rose and fell in a rhythm that didn't match military discipline. "Impossible," Torvvic said. The word was quiet, almost to himself. Daniel's voice came through the audio pickup, soft and steady. "Possible, just not the way you expected." The observation room was silent. Dr. Rowe's skin had settled on a color Ren had never seen before, a pale blue that the Felsen medical texts associated with profound emotional shift. Grath stood in the doorway, the Turok's armor-plated arms hanging at his sides, his jaw slack in an expression that Ren read as the death of a philosophy. Torvvic turned, his ceremonial decorations scraped the wall again, but the sound was different now, less like thunder, more like something being dragged away. "Commission the formal study," Torvvic said. His voice was gravel, but the edges had softened. "Full resources, full documentation. The Dreth military hierarchy does not ignore proof, even when it contradicts doctrine." He paused, his massive head tilted toward the viewport, toward the human sitting on the floor of a siege-class containment cell with a creature that had killed 17 soldiers. "Perhaps you are not as soft as you appear, Cadet Brooks. Perhaps softness is a word we use for patience we haven't learned to value." He left, the observation room breathed again. Ren found Daniel in the common area 3 hours later. The human was drinking coffee, the same recycled cup from before, though the Academy had offered him Earth import stock in recognition of his success. Daniel had refused. He sat at the same table designed for 40 species, in the same chair that didn't fit him, with the same waterproof notebook open to a page full of spirals and numbers. "Instructor," Daniel said without looking up. "Cadet Brooks." Ren settled into the chair. His 4 arms arranged themselves on the table in a posture he no longer recognized as defeat. "The Academy has approved your promotion to assistant instructor, unprecedented for a non-graduate. Your seminar on nonviolent specimen interaction has exceeded capacity. 17 new students from 9 species have registered." Daniel turned a page in his notebook. The spirals continued, new numbers and new configurations. "SC-779, Ren continued. "Approved for sanctuary world relocation, never used for military examination again. The veterinary staff reports nesting behavior. The creature that killed 17 soldiers is building a home." Daniel sipped his coffee. "It feels safe enough to be a parent again." "The exam ravager from the habitat dome," Ren said. "Reassigned as therapy animal for traumatized soldiers, your method is being taught as supplementary curriculum. Fleet Commander Torvvic has requested personal instruction." Daniel looked up, his eyes were tired but focused. The galaxy forgot that lesson, instructor, or maybe never learned it in the first place. Back on Earth, we spent thousands of years learning that cooperation beats domination in the long run. We forgot it sometimes too, but we had enough time to remember. Ren's mandibles clicked, he let them. The sound was no longer nervous habit. It was acknowledgement. The greatest warriors, Ren said, are those who find ways to avoid fighting in the first place. Daniel smiled. It was the same smile from the briefing room, the one Ren hadn't been able to read. Now he understood it. It wasn't knowing something the room didn't. It wasn't not caring about the room's opinion. It was patience. The patience of someone who had learned that most problems dissolved if you stopped trying to dominate them. "Do you want it alive or in pieces?" Daniel asked. The question hung between them, callback to callback, transformed by everything that had happened since. "Because I can do either one, but one of those options is cruel and unnecessary." Ren stood. He extended one hand, a human gesture he had learned from watching Daniel interact with handlers and cadets and creatures that the Academy called monsters. Daniel shook it. The grip was firm, unhurried, the touch of someone who had nothing left to prove. 4 months later, the common area had changed. The 40-world food court still served 40 cuisines, but the conversations had shifted. Grath sat at a table with 3 Turok cadets from his Pride clan, demonstrating human tracking methods with his armor-plated arms spread in a posture of teaching rather than dominance. Quickclaw moved through the crowd with her blade arms sheathed, stopping to answer questions from a Thenic first-year who barely reached her waist. The small xenobiology student took notes in a waterproof notebook, a spiral with numbers that didn't match standard grid coordinates. Daniel sat at his usual table. The chair still didn't fit him, he didn't seem to care. Instructor Ren approached with his lower arms crossed and his upper arms carrying a data tablet. The tablet showed attendance figures for Daniel's next seminar, capacity exceeded by 40%, species from worlds Ren had never visited requesting instruction in methods that contradicted everything the Academy had taught for generations. "Your coffee," Ren said, setting a cup on the table. "Earth import, no recycling center negotiation required. The handlers have established a formal supply line. It seems your preferences have become institutional." Daniel picked up the cup. The steam rose between them, carrying the bitter scent of something grown on a planet light years away. "SC-779's eggs," Ren said. 12 viable. Sanctuary World reports the creature has established a territory 3 kilometers from the relocation site, no aggressive incidents. The behavioral assessment team has stopped using the word irredeemable. Daniel nodded. He didn't speak. He simply sat, drinking coffee, watching the common area fill with cadets from species that had once measured worth through combat prowess and now measured it through something else. Something quieter, something harder to quantify and impossible to fake. Ren's mandibles clicked in the thoughtful hum pattern. He no longer caught himself doing it. The sound had become part of him, a physical manifestation of a worldview that cracked open a little more each day. "The humans' quiet revolution continued," Ren said. It wasn't a declaration, it was observation. The kind of statement an instructor made when he realized the curriculum was being rewritten in real time, not through proclamation but through proof. Daniel set his cup down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the exam badge, standard issue polymer, scuffed edges from field use. The institutional validation he had handed to a handler with a message that no longer seemed to mean what the Academy thought it meant. He placed it on the table. The scuffed edges caught the starlight filtering through the common area's viewport, a small constellation of wear marks that told their own story of use and survival and transformation. Daniel's exam badge sat on his desk. He no longer needed it to prove anything. The creatures he had helped wore no badges, yet they remembered him. Beyond the viewport, the station turned through the dark. Somewhere on a sanctuary world, a creature that had killed 17 soldiers built a nest. Somewhere in the Academy, a Thenic first-year drew spirals in a notebook. Somewhere in the common area, coffee cooled in a recycled cup while starlight caught the scuffed edges of a badge that had outlived its purpose. The humans' quiet revolution continued.